Hello, I'd like to welcome you all to today's talk, The Reaction of the Italian and German Radical Right to Democracy Protection Measures After the 2009 European Debt Crisis, a comparative case study held by Erik Zignaigo. Erik is a PhD student at the TU Dresden and an affiliated researcher at the Hannah-Arendt-Institut since 2022. In his talk, he is going to show the first results of his doctoral research. With these words, I turn over the floor to Erik Zignaigo.
Thanks. So, as just said, this is the title of my research project, The Reaction of the Radical Right to Democracy Protection Measures. And just an overview, my research question is, how does the radical right react to democracy protection measures in general? So if it is possible to attribute to the radical right an intrinsic attribute as an oppositor to democracy protection measures, my hypothesis at the beginning is that the radical right actually opposes democracy protection measures by two means, more or less. Number one, appealing to the popular sovereignty, and the second is appealing to the freedom abstract ideals. I have been working with three key concepts. So the idea of democracy, the idea of the radical right concept, and the militant democracy concept, in detail, democracy protection measures. Why Italy and Germany? For me, they are the best model possible because of the following reasons. They lived the same time the economic crisis of the euro after 2009. They have a similar political context after the crisis. In particular, they lived an increased electoral support for radical right parties. In Germany, AfD, and in Italy, Fratelli d'Italia and Lega. Moreover, not to be forgotten, they share a common constitutional context, despite being so different in some aspects. They have common traits, in particular concerning the political system. They are both parliamentary democracies, and they share a wide spectrum of democracy protection measures, and they share a political tradition in support of the democracy protection measures, even if they differ somehow. I work with the concept of democracy. I need to distinguish between two main conceptions. This distinction is not the only one possible, but it is the best alternative when you study militant democracy theory. It comes from Bastian Ripkemer, an expert of militant democracy, and usually you define between relativist and principled or normative conception of democracy. The relativist one is democracy seen as a methodology or a method to follow to take decisions. That means it is a competition to elect people which take decisions based on the majority rule and equivalence of the participants to the decision process. I want to stress the point that equivalence is not equality. If you have some questions concerning that distinction, you can, of course, ask later. On the other side, we have the principle or normative, the idea of democracy, which is based on a system of democratic values, fundamental democratic values, which are pluralism, political equality, self-determination, tolerance, and the rule of law, of course. All those values come from the interaction and existence together of two philosophical ideas, namely freedom and equality. Then the radical right. I needed to distinguish between extreme right and radical right. The extreme right is usually considered like a subject which rejects the idea of democracy in a total way, in toto, and tolerates the use of violence as a legitimate tool for the political struggle. On the other side, the radical right, which is usually populist, rejects only some, in particular, liberal aspects or liberal foundations of the democratic society, social, economic, and order through the rules of the game. So they do not reject the rules of the game, they reject some political, ideological traits of the game. It's not considered a hard opposition to democracy, but only in respect with some specific aspects, which may change according to the specific party. After this first theoretical view, I had to resolve some remaining issues. First of all, the term radical and radicalism is problematic for me for two reasons. So the first one is that the term radical in Italian policies means a thing totally different. The Radical Party was the most liberal party in Italian history. So calling radical a party which could be liberal is a countersens here. Moreover, the term radical has a semantic problem. I can be a radical person if I am a Republican and I live in the UK because I propose radical changes. But this radicalism doesn't mean that I want to end the UK democracy. And then illiberal democracy, which is a term nowadays even always used, is problematic because it takes reference to the study of the militant democracy and might bring semantic issues. The problem with the militant democracy theory is that illiberal democracy is not a democracy. And according to the dominant theoretical grounding, illiberal democracy is somehow considered a democratic state. The best example I can illustrate you is Hungary, where the leader of the country, which is Viktor Orban, openly proposes an illiberal democracy as a new model for his country. And according to the militant democracy theory, this cannot be called a democracy, even if it's called an illiberal democracy, because there's no democracy which is illiberal. That's why I added some German contributions to my theory, and in particular, the distinction between hard and soft extremism. The most important aspect is that both of them, oppose democracy somehow, even if in a different way, as you can see here. In particular, the soft extremism accept or even support the relativist conception. So the democracy as a method to take decisions. It rejects some values, as I said. It tends to adopt non-conforming behavior, so non-subversive, but still in opposition to democratic values behavior. And it tends to have a hard extremist internal minority or internal faction, while the hard kind of extremism tends to have a soft minority inside. For example, AfD tends to have some traits of neo-national socialism inside, which is still a minority inside the party. Today is a minority. On the other side, like in Fratelli d'Italia, so the Italian party, which I'm taking now, they have a very conservative majority, and then they have a neo-fascist minority inside. That proves that they belong to the radical right and soft, so to say, extremism group. So these are the three parties I have chosen: Fratelli d'Italia, Lega, and Alternative für Deutschland. They were born after the European debt crisis, apart from the Lega, but I have a justification for that. So the Lega was founded in 1991 by Bossi, which was the historical leader of the party. But the party of Bossi was, yes, radical right party, but it was a regionalist, autonomist, and somehow separatist party. So nationalism was absent. So Italian nationalism, we only had like the Padania mythos, which is like the northern region of Italy, and this party wanted to separate the northern regions from the state. But with the leadership of Salvini, which started indeed after the European debt crisis, the party went through a conversion path, transforming it from a regionalist one to a nationalist Italian party, which means that now the party belongs to nationalism seen as the Italian nationalism and not Northern Italy nationalism. Then the militant democracy theory, it is based on two assumptions, theoretical assumptions, which you need to even start talking about that. So democracy is the best form of government. Of course, democracy intended as values, not as method. And democracy is under a perpetual condition of existential threats. Why these two assumptions? If you don't consider democracy the best options, there's no reason to defend it, because you can obtain a better one. Why do we have to consider it always in a status of danger? Because there's no reason to defend something which is not in danger. Then you have a short definition of militant democracy. Militant democracy is a democracy in a normative sense, which takes preemptive and reactive actions, which are called democracy protection measures, against any actor or fact which might oppose, harm, overturn, or destroy the democratic order. Here you have a small list of some examples of democracy protection measures. So party bans are the most, let's say, typical measure. Limitation of freedom of thought and expression in general. Limitation of assembly rights. Limitation of active and passive electoral rights. The sanitary cordon practice, which is called Brandmauer in Germany, in Italy is called constitutional arc. The action of liberal institutions, for example, neutral political offices like the President of the Republic, agencies, constitutional justice, so the constitutional court mainly, entrenched clauses and eternity clauses in constitutions. That means the clauses which forbid constitutional amendment on fundamental rights, and then positive discrimination policies, and so on. What I am doing actually. So first of all, I select a list of democracy protection measures taken in Italy and Germany between 2012 and 2024. 7 measures for each country. Then for each measure I selected, my research explores the reaction of the radical right parties, the 3 I nominated before, and observes the reaction against or to these measures, basically through text analysis. So my texts are parliamentary debate texts, both in commission and the plenary, social media posts, usually adopted by the readers more than just members of the parties, newspaper, talk shows, which are quite popular in Italy, and interviews in general. That's the list I have selected. Concerning Italy, I will explain you in more detail the Fiano bill, but for now, I want just to stress that both countries have 3 measures in common, which are the Sargentini report, von der Leyen's coalition to the center, and EU conditionality mechanism. I found a good idea to take 3 measures and to take that in common to both countries, so Italy and Germany, so that I will be able to compare not only between the parties, but only between I will be able to compare between the 2 countries. So the same measure is applied to Germany and to Italy, but maybe German party, the AfD, reacts in a different way in comparison to the Italian ones. I will explain you now one of the measures I had taken. So the first results, which is the Fiano bill. It was called in the media the anti-Predappio bill law. Predappio is a small town in Italy. It is considered a symbol of the fascist regime because it is the town where Mussolini was born and the town where he was buried. So you can still visit the Mussolini family tomb in Predappio town. In Predappio, it is the town, it's quite popular nowadays because there is a souvenir shop there where souvenirs concerning fascism, like openly pro-fascist souvenirs, are sold, legally sold. And each year we assist to a sort of pilgrimage of neo-fascist activists to Predapio to visit the tomb of Mussolini and to visit the souvenir shop. In particular, on the 28th of October, which is the anniversary of the March on Rome, which is the march which brought Mussolini to power before being nominated by the king as prime minister of the Italian kingdom. So this proposal, this bill, wants to intervene against this, against merchandising and propagation of neo-fascist propaganda. And this is a translation of the bill made for you. So it modifies the article 293 bis of the penal code, Italian penal code, and says, unless the act constitutes a more serious crime, anyone who propagates the images or contents proper to the fascist party or the German National Socialist Party or to the relevant ideologies, even only through the production, distribution, dissemination, or sale of goods depicting persons, images, or symbols clearly referring to them, or publicly calls their symbology or gestures, shall be punished by imprisonment from 6 months to 2 years. The punishment referred to the first paragraph shall be increased by 1/3 if the act is committed through telematic or computer instruments. So that's the bill. And that is, so to say, the Italian legislature. So what happened with this bill? It was deposited by Emanuele Fiano, which is a member of the Democratic Party, which is the Italian version of the SPD, so to say. It was deposited in the lower house, Camera dei Deputati, in 2015. So the Parliamentary Commission worked on it, the Justice Commission, around 1 year. It was then discussed, voted, and approved by the Chamber of Deputies, so the lower house of Italy. It was transmitted to the Senate to be approved also there. But then the Italian parliament was dissolved, one of the many government crises we had. So we had to go to the vote. And when the parliament is dissolved, the bill decays. It is important for you to consider that in the Italian system, it is necessary that a bill is approved by both chambers to come into force. And that's an important difference between Germany and Italy. And if the bill is not approved by both chambers, it is not a law, not yet. So this Fiano bill remained a bill because it was never approved. But still, it is an important and significant case study. And that's why, so I collected the reactions of the members of the two Italian parties during the plenary discussion. The list you see shows the members. So Rampelli, Ignazio La Russa, Cirielli from Fratelli d'Italia, and for the Lega, Barbara Saltamartini, Federica, and Montero. Each of them contributed to the debate through one or more significant interventions. A significant intervention is an intervention which actually concerns the content of the measure, because in some moments I found like interventions for bureaucratic issues, for administrative issues. They were proposing to merge some amendments or to separate them, so they didn't talk about the measure itself. So I only take significant interventions. As you can see, Fratelli d'Italia made 12 interventions during the debate, while the Lega made 7. Concerning interventions from Fratelli d'Italia, from 12 interventions, all of them, any single intervention, showed opposition to the bill, any single intervention. 11 of them argued against the measure through the so-called whataboutism. Whataboutism is a rhetorical technique to say, I move the attention focus from the topic to another one, which I claim to be of a bigger relevance. And here are differentiated the categories used. So it mostly Islamic fundamentalism and elder people, and also economic issues. You will see that if you sum up these numbers, they will get more than 11. That's because in one intervention we had a member of the parliament appealing to more than one argumentation. So that's why if you sum up all the small numbers, you will get more than 11. So basically, for example, I remember one of the interventions from a Lega member or Fratelli member, and they said they were arguing that fascism is not a problem in comparison with Islamic fundamentalism, in comparison with migration, in particular from African countries, and in comparison with the economic crisis, the supposed economic crisis. 5 of the interventions denounced an attack on freedom, in particular freedom of thought, speech, and self-determination of the people, in particular concerning the gestures, because according to the proposal, also gestures are forbidden. So to make the so-called Roman salute would be forbidden according to this law. So they appeal to the self-determination value to say, I am the Lord or the Lady of my body and I can decide whatever I want. So they used, which is quite common in neo-fascist parties, the tu quoque argument concerning communism. Tu quoque argument means basically that it's similar to whataboutism somehow, and the argument was the following. They are saying that fascism may be a problem, but also communism. So again, they are moving the attention focus from fascism, which was the issue of the bill, to communism. And they say, since that you're not persecuting communism, it has no sense to persecute fascism. Once there were a personal attack on the proponents of the bill, which you will see and read in a few moments. There was also negationism or minimization of the issue. That means those 3 members argued that fascism is no longer a problem, or is not a problem, that big problem. So it's a marginal issue in the political debate. And for that reason, this law should be rejected, according to them. There is one case of openly neo-fascist propaganda, I will show you later. And then the legitimacy of the vote mechanism. I will show you one of the interventions of Ignazio La Russa, just to give you a clear image of who he is. Ignazio Benito Maria La Russa was called after Mussolini by his family because his second name is Benito. He was born in Sicily. He studied his political activism in the neo-fascist party Movimento Sociale Italiano, in particular in its young wing, which was called the Young Front, so to say. He was then a member of the post-fascist party Alleanza Nazionale between 90s and the 2000s. And then he took part to the center-right party of Berlusconi until 2012, when he, with Giorgia Meloni, co-founded the party Fratelli d'Italia. His political career is quite rich. He was a Minister of Defense in Berlusconi's cabinet. And then he was elected in 2022, president of the Senato, which is the upper house of the Italian parliament, which is the second highest hierarchical position in Italian state. And that shows how integrated the radical right is in Italy. You should imagine that to have the impression that AfD gets a position like Bundestagspräsident. That's the parallel case in Italy. In Italy, it is a reality. So the radical right has become a mainstream party and now is the ruling party of the government in Italy. I have extracted some parts of the intervention. So La Russa's intervention number 6, Legislature 17, report session 848, Tuesday, 12 September 2017. And he says, I have respect for the rapporteur, which is Emanuele Fiano, the proponent, and I know his personal history. just as I know the personal history of so many murdered by partisans. So the personal history is that the father of Fiano was Neto Fiano. He was a survivor of the Holocaust, one of the few survivors from Siena town. So he says, I respect his history, just as I know the personal history of so many murdered by partisans. So he's trying to move the attention from what the fascists did to what he argues the partisans did against fascist people, so the violence they perpetrated during war, of course. With relatives murdered after the end of the war, and to him I say, I understand what they, Democratic Party, why they chose you. I understand you are the fig leaf. They don't give a damn about anti-fascism and fascism. You are a kind of left-wing restyling of a party in disarray that is a Democratic Party. So you can see here the personal attack against the proponent of the bill. He is saying you are being instrumentalized by your party, and I don't care about what you are proposing. So let's take as a laugh or dramatically pretend to laugh. So paradoxically, he says, let's tear down everything. The nefariousness invented by Mussolini also be eliminated then. No more compulsory insurances for occupational illnesses, no more 40-hour working week, no more maternity and childcare, and no more legal aid. This kind of argumentation is typical of the Italian neo-fascism because they pretend to justify the fascist regime or the fascist crimes through appealing to the supposed social policy of fascism. And the things that La Russa cite here are actually false. So all these social reforms were approved or before fascism, during the last liberal Italian government of Giolitti, or after the fascist regime, which means thanks to the collaboration between Democrazia Cristiana Center Party and the Communist Party. So you see that here, this is a typical neo-fascist propaganda because you try to spread fake news or fake facts, and you try to show a different version of factual history to justify a regime which was anti-democratic. Actually, she makes no mentions about the fall of democracy because of the fascist movement. Again, same intervention, another part. What offends the historical memory is not the past, but the present. So it's not fascism that offends memory, it's now. It's the present that offends the memory of Italians, because it does not only offend those who have different historical assessments of fascism, those who know how to recognize its many shadows, but also its lights. But it also offends the true anti-fascist. So he makes a distinction between true and false anti-fascism, or right and wrong anti-fascism. Those who do not exploit fascism from their armchairs or with a view to elections. Those who, with weapons in their fists, fought fascism for real, as there would be a false way to fight fascism. And those especially who fought it not to bring back a Stalinistic dictatorship. And again, here we have the two arguments against communism, in particular Stalinism. But because they sought democracy and freedom, who are the ones who have our respect. And then, important here, they were anti-fascist who today, like us, are indignant at this instrumentalization. So he's trying to cover the party or his figure with sort of anti-fascist values, in spite of doing openly neo-fascist propaganda here. And then a sort of removal of the attention let us leave fascism and anti-fascism to our past and its historical memory, and let us instead take care of the present and the future. We will do so against you and without you. So I have chosen La Russa's intervention for two reasons. La Russa is one of the, I would say, the second most important member of the party after Meloni. He is a historical activist of Italian neo-fascism. And as you can see from before, La Russa made 8 interventions. So he was very active during the debate. Actually, only La Russa made more interventions than the whole Lega party together. And of course, he's now president of the Italian upper house and second in the hierarchical order in Italian institutions. So that concerns Fratelli d'Italia and La Russa in particular. And now I will do the same for Lega party. First of all, again, all the interventions were opposing the measure. Again, all of them, any single intervention, there was no exception again. Once more, whataboutism was used. You can see that here there was a generic also appeal, just saying there are more important issues without nominating anyone. Then again, they denounced an attack on freedom. They used again, even if not so as Fratelli d'Italia, the tu quoque argument. They made a personal attack on their proponent twice. They used negationism or minimization of the issue, and then made a sort of typical populist appeal to the so-called common sense. That means this bill has no sense, it is illogical. So it's against the common sense of the Italian people. I will show you, again, one intervention from one of the members, the most important here who made interventions, which is Massimiliano Fedriga. He is born in Verona, so in the north, while La Russa was born in Sicily, so in the south. He started his political activism in Bossi's Lega Nord. So he belongs to the so-called old school, so people belonging to the old party, and then they moved to the new party, but they still maintained somehow the autonomist perspective on the Italian politics. His career is shorter than La Russa's, of course, because he's younger, but just two points. He was member of the lower house for 10 years, and now he's still the president of the Friuli Venezia Giulia region, which is the region whose capital is Trieste. So you can identify it, so northeast of Italy. And here you have his intervention. Intervention number 1 of Massimiliano Fedriga, same legislature period, same session. Unfortunately, this parliament seems to be having a surreal debate on a surreal bill. And unfortunately, I say that the Democratic Party is using the dramas of the 20th century, the tears of the 20th century, to campaign for the next general elections. And I consider this to be an unworthy thing. I consider it unworthy to treat such sensitive subjects in such a partisan manner. Here we have an important part, because he says, I oppose it, and I believe that idiots are fought with ideas and not with crazy laws like this one. Here you see a difference between La Russa and Federica, so between Fratelli d'Italia and Lega, because he has no problems to call neo-fascism a group of idiots, while in Fratelli d'Italia party, you have neo-fascism as an important constitutive ideological trait that can be easily explained, because there is no neo-fascist origin of the Lega party in its history. It was born as a regionalist party. It moved to a more nationalist position, but it was never touched by neo-fascism in any way. Then he recurs again to the to Quoque argumentation. But I'll say more. It's crazy because it doesn't even consider all the dramas of the 20th century. So again, the same technique you saw with La Russa. I came from a fatherland, tormented land, which is his region, where every year on 25th of April, which is a celebration of the end of fascism in Italy, which is a free day, also today is considered a free day, so a national Remembrance Day, so liberation from fascism. There is someone who goes to the square with the Italian flag and Tito's Red Star. This flag was a flag belonging to a small minority of the partisan movement, in particular, the small fraction of the communist part of the partisan movement, which argued in favor of a communist regime after the fall of the Italian fascist government. Despite our country's dead on the border, and here he directly mentions the Foibe massacre, which was a sort of ethnical cleaning adopted by Tito's regime against Italian people living in Italian-speaking regions in Yugoslavia, so Dalmatia, more or less. There are still some towns which are called by Italian names and where you can find Italian-speaking minorities, in particular Croatia again, and some towns in Slovenia, the coast one, of course. Then he adds, but one can talk about that. One can go to the square with that flag, according to the Democratic Party, and nothing happens. Again, two Quoque argumentation. He's saying, okay, you are saying we should forbid fascist propaganda, but how about the communist one? But today, Mr. President, I am not asking for those people to be prevented by law from going to the square, because I will always have the right and I will always fight with the voice of the words of people who understand the dramas that those people experienced. And I will say to those people, imbeciles, you don't know how many people died for the crazy Tito communist ideology. So today in this house, there is someone who makes a law for those who sell lighters with Mussolini's face. He's like simplifying the proposal. And in the meantime, administers a region that teaches denialism about the Foibe. I won't play this game. So here you can see the typical argumentation moved by Lega party against this measure. Just going to the conclusions, my first evidences through the first investigation I made, considering not only this measure in particular, when I selected all the measures, I of course had also an overview on the content, on reactions. So the first evidence confirms the hypothesis. So there is an opposition to democracy protection measures, and this opposition is systematical, which means that any intervention I have seen has shown opposition to the democratic protection measures. The opposition to democracy protection measures appears, in this case, to be an intrinsic trait of the radical right, which was one of the focuses of my research, because what I wanted to verify is that is it possible to attribute to the radical right an opposition to democracy protection measure as one of the intrinsic traits of the radical right? According to the results, yes. Then the argumentations I have hypothesized, so freedom and popular sovereignty. So freedom in this case was largely referred to in order to attack the legitimacy of the proposal, in this case, the Fiano Bill. In contrast, however, and quite unexpectedly, an appeal to popular sovereignty was completely absent from the interventions. So I have tried to reformulate my hypothesis to a more refined one, and which is, so the radical right parties systematically oppose democracy protection measures, which appears clearly. However, the kind of narrative or argumentation they use differs according to the political circumstances. That means it tends towards victimhood or appealing to freedom from an oppressive government or an oppressive majority, when the party finds itself in the opposition in the parliament. On the other side, what it tends to rather to an appeal to popular sovereignty after the party has reached a government position. So after the party is part of the governing majority supporting one government. The next steps I will continue my analysis with the other measures. The next two ones are Zeuner Bill. The Zeuner Bill was an attempt to extend the hate speech law protecting ethnic and religious minorities, and to extend this protection to 3 more categories. So women, LGBT community, and people with disabilities. This bill failed because it was rejected by the upper house by secret ballots. However, I will explore this case again. And then the Brandmauer practice, both in Italy and Germany, they differ somehow, but both of them had at least one episodic moment. Germany more systematic, but Italy had one episodic moment of constitutional arc, let's say. Let's use the Italian name for that. So those are my next steps. As a conclusion, just to leave you, I was asked to take one picture when I was asked to present my research here. I have chosen this one. I just wanted to explain what is that. So here you have the moment of the signature of the Italian Constitution in 1947, December 1947. And according to my vision, as I understand it, it really very good illustrates the core of the militant democracy idea. So to put democratic values inside the Constitution and to oblige the system to obey to them. And here a very small citation from John Lewis, which I think very good summarizes it. Democracy is not a state, it is an act. And that was all. I thank you for your attention.